Hi guys. Well, sorry I had to start this again. Let me do something real quick. Share. Uh, Hold on. Going live right now. Join in. Post to Facebook. There you go. Let's see. Try one other thing. All right, I'm not going to worry about this one right now. Okay. So, all right, guys, I'm just going to do. All right, close. All right, so I'm going to talk about some stuff that I've been rolling around in my head for many years, looking at the condition of what's happening in our world, looking at it from top down, from local government to global government, understanding the nature of what's happening right now. So let me talk about government in general. I'm just going to flat out say, what is the purpose of government? Government is the end result mechanism of a group of people deciding to create a structured series of rules and regulations that protect the interest of that group of people at any moment. The idea being there is a group of people, doesn't matter what type of group, this is consistent all through history. From the dawn of man to present, this is the same structure. Whatever group you have decides that they are not in control or they feel threatened by some outside or internal force that threatens their safety, however they define it. So they decide to band together, separate themselves from whatever the threat is, create as rules, a series of structured rules to protect their interests so that they can have freedoms, however they define it, that protect their interest. That, in its most basic state, is what government is. This is true from the dawn of man to present. This is the same cycle. It is tribalism. It's seen in every facet of society, from the home to whatever, to the global stage. A government is just a condensed body of people who have come together to create a series of rules and regulations for the purpose of defining the boundaries of a group to protect their interests. Now, that's what government is in its most basic form. But why does that government exist? What is, once you have defined that, then what's the motivator for that government to continue? Then you have to look at, there's a book 3,000 years old on the art of warfare. It's called The Art of War by Sun Tzu, Chinese military strategist. He talked about the idea of dynasty building. The purpose of government is to grow, is to obtain power. So you have a government that's formed. Is, if there is no government, and there, which means there is no power, the purpose is to create a government to gain power where you didn't have it before. The next stage is, once you've created the government and you've gained power by any means necessary to create that established government, the next thing is to maintain what you've created, the power you've created, the structure you've created, maintain it by any means necessary. The next step is to grow that power that you've maintained and you've obtained by any means necessary. So if a government was created by a group of people or how a collective that felt that they did not have power and were in effect um, oppressed, then ultimately what happens is they've now created a structure where they feel a sense of power, they see empowerment, they feel a sense of safety, a sense of control. At some point, they will have reached the zenith of their abilities to they've maxed out in terms of the building process. They've reached full maturity. Now the goal is to maintain and grow that that control. So if they started out not feeling or they felt oppressed, at some point they will grow. They have now maintained control and structure. They will protect from any potential oncoming threat to the power structures they've defined. In effect, the oppressed will become the oppressors to a new dynamic. This is a true historical arc of every government on the face of the earth, not just formalized. We're talking on a tribal level too. You see this happen in different communities, amongst individuals. You see it in history in terms of Native Americans who had different warring tribes, and you see it in other countries amongst different enclaves, different uh, societal pockets of groups fighting for control, fighting amongst themselves. Now, the other angle is this: when you get to the top of the heap, when you get to the ultimate level of control, where you get what are called world or global governments, where you have nations now, you have the United States, Canada, Russia, Ukraine, whatever. You have all these different global interests who've carved out for themselves their niche in control. The same rules of thumb apply. If you don't have control, get control. Once you have control, maintain control. And once you've maintained control, grow control by any means necessary. Now, on a humanistic level, what is the most uh, what is the most basic unit of government? Security, control. It's the family unit. Every single person is born into a triangulated dynamic called a family. The conditions and what that family looks like is environmentally uh, shaped, but the core structure remains the same. No human being on the face of the earth, because human beings as a species are not asexual reproductive creatures, the male gender cannot birth or morph or create an offspring of himself without the assistance of the female reproductive tools needed to create that offspring. Vice versa. A woman cannot produce another human without any of the reproductive tools generated via the male counterpart. Even with science, it still has to go back to the male reproductive chemicals being utilized to impregnate and fertilize a female egg to create. So you have an inherent triangle happening. Now, society then will say, okay, well, that's the mechanism, but the family unit we're going to shape and we're going to allow free will to determine. That's fine. Now, here's the problem with that, though. From birth to 5 to 7 years old, what a child experiences is a first for every experience. And a child, emotionally, social, emotional learning, all of that is formulated for the most part in the first 5 to 7 years of life. Why? Because everything that child experiences is a brand new experience. There's no frame of reference. So for those first 5 to 7 years of life, the child is getting exposed to firsts that its brain must try to understand and process so that it can function and have a feel of safety moving forward. If a child is born into a healthy emotional social environment, the likelihood is they will grow up to be emotionally grounded, well structured, relational individuals who will go out into the world and coexist with other potentially relationally healthy people. But if that child is born into a dysfunctional environment where it does not know what a healthy baseline truly looks at, it's left to interpret for itself how to navigate those words, those environments for its own sense of safety. And if it's dysfunctional, but the child survives, the child will grow up, go out into the world using those same tools, probably not to a successful end because they're going to interface with people who are unhealthy and people who are healthy. So you're going to get a mixed bag and you're going to have the higher potential for relational dysfunction as an adult and as in a society. Now, those people grow up. They go and work. They go to work, have relational issues at work, they get married, they have relationships, and then they also decide if they want to go into government. Well, if we know what government is about and what the purpose of government is about, a person with an unhealthy attitude where they don't have control oftentimes will gravitate towards career based ventures that give them a sense of control, sense of empowerment. A lot of times these are um, socially structured authority positions, uh, government, legal, lawyers, and whatnot, um, doctors, uh, engineers, some kind of the people who control the workings of society, education, even, uh, and the, and even within education. So in all of those different structures, you have the same power dynamic happening. You have your pyramid of hierarchy of power structures. Even within a corporation, you have this hierarchy of power, of where people fit and try to get control within their little neck of the woods. So if we learn everything in the family, okay, and that's kind of where our basis is, and that is healthy or unhealthy, that's going to contribute to what goes on. So I want to bring up the issue of government itself. If government is motivated by control, power, growth of the masses that are governed, then it can't have competition from the governed. So people within that governed society will go into a mode of government to get control, to give themselves a sense of empowerment over the governed. And at any moment that the governed create a potential threat, those who have now moved into the government will try to suppress. This is true of all history. This is a generalized understanding of power dynamic in our world, from local government to global government. This is not, I'm not promoting this. I'm basically giving an overview of how power dynamics work in our society. This is an educational understanding of power dynamic. So, what you have to ask is, okay, if you look at government as a means of control of the masses, and the government exists by proxy to assure that they can maintain and have a purpose, then if everybody's not breaking laws, let's say everybody's living in a utopian world where we don't have murder, we don't have theft, we don't have greed, we have people concerned for one another. If people showed honor and integrity and humility and concern and empathy for one another, then that means they're not breaking laws, right? And they're not fighting each other. Then what purpose is a government? Because the people are self-regulating. If the people are self-regulating, it makes the government irrelevant. It makes the government not it's a redundancy. In scripture, you hear about the idea of a government, basically, laws are only created for the lawless. Thou shalt not murder, okay, or, only applies to people who choose to murder. So for anybody who doesn't choose to murder, that whole law and that whole structure is irrelevant. It has no power over them. So you got to ask yourself, when it comes to, oh, and also let's bring another issue. If people are making their livelihood in terms of their paychecks on the government dole, which is through taxation, because governments don't produce anything, they only manage what is already in production. Government makes money off of transactional fees, money and actions taking place, property changing hands, transactional fees. This money going between this party and this party, as the money travels, the government will take a chunk out of that as a service fee. If no money is changing hands between the two parties, you can't monetize a transaction that doesn't exist. So the government makes its revenue on transactional fees. And if governments are adversarial, if the courts rely on people arguing their side, win-win, there's going to be a loser, a potential loser, a potential winner, where inevitably rights or property is going to change from one hand to the other. Then the government can make money on the transaction that takes place from one party to another. So, what interest does the government have in helping people live a harmonious lifestyle where there's no animosity between the two? It's against their better interest. The idea is it's against the government's best interest for people to live at peace with one another. Because if they live at peace, then there's no reason to go to the courts to settle disputes. There's no reason to employ the people in the courts because there's just no revenue coming in. There's no cases. So when you look at the legal system and how much money lawyers make, how much money legislators make, if you look at the laws themselves, Let's talk about lawyers. What's the job of a lawyer? A lawyer is hired to do one thing as the guiding motivator. The lawyer is hired to argue a client's interest. As long as there's an argument to be had and there's money to be paid to that lawyer to argue, then the lawyer stays employed. If the client has no money, the lawyer will no longer argue and find a client who does have money to keep them arguing. As long as the client has a revenue stream available to that lawyer will formulate an argument, file a motion, no matter how absurd, doesn't matter. Will file it on behalf of their client. They're not responsible for the end result of filing of that motion. They're just responsible for arguing the motion. The responsibility for the outcome of that argument rests in the hands of a judge or a jury. Now, in our legal system, judges are either appointed or elected. And in that, one of the prerequisites, if I'm correct, of being a judge is I believe you also have to be a member of the American State Bar. You have to be a lawyer whose knowledge in law. Okay. But think about this. If lawyers are paid to argue for the interest of their client, as long as there's an argument, then they move into the judiciary. Who is their client now? The client is the governing body that elected them or appointed them, the state, the local magistrate, the local authority. So the judge is now actively adjudicating, I guess is the word, the interests, not of the parties, but of the state or local authorities that elected them, got them into the office that they represent. So if you have two parties that come into a court to argue with two lawyers, actually three lawyers, who's now a judge, there's actually three parties of interest. Party A, which would be the petitioner or the respondent, the plaintiff or the defendant. Party B is the defendant or respondent. Party C is the judiciary, who represents the state. Okay. If Party A and Party B argue in front of Party C, and everybody's got their own interest, but they're at the top of the heap. Let's say Party A wins over Party B. Okay. If Party A wins, that means Party B owes them something or owes a debt, whatever property. That means they have to transfer party. So Party C makes money on the transactions that happen between the two and the governance over that transaction. But yet Party B, who had the judgment against them, has the ability to file an appeal, which keeps the case in the courts. And every appeal that's filed costs money, requiring Party C to oversee the process, and Party C still makes more money. If party A and party B leave the courts, then go to an outside mediator or outside ability and decide for themselves, hey, let's settle our differences outside. Yay, we're happy. We move on. We're happy amongst themselves. The government makes no money because they can't regulate the transaction. It's decided between the parties. So the government wants people in the courts for as long as possible, because as long as it's possible, the government still has a revenue stream on transactional fees. The government has no interest in positive relational activities between two parties because they lose out on revenue. This is why family law is an $82 billion a year industry in the United States alone. That is why, regardless of how the laws are written on the books about fairness and equality for all parties, there's a little asterisk. So the law promotes equality. The law is written to promote equality and consistency. But written into the law, remember, lawyers who are the ones who legislate this and vote on it and whatnot and do the whole kit and caboodle, they're the ones who make money off of argumentation. There's a little asterisk, curiously, in the legal system. It's called judicial discretion. Judicial discretion allows, it grants the individual judge a lot of authority to interpret the law for themselves, respective to the case they're dealing with. However, they choose to justify their interpretation, they're given that right. So if you have a clear case of murder, blah, 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 whatever, of one party murdering another, but the judge, but that's a jury case. Sorry, that's different. Let me look at like civil cases. Let me move to. So you have a case of fraud, right, from one party to another. The judge, on paper, this all looks pretty clear, but the judge has the ability to interpret the application of those laws. If one decision would eradicate and clear the air and remove that case from the courts forever and everything's done, then there's no more money to be had. There's no more adjudicating the process. They lose control. But if all of a sudden there's a clear-cut case of this person defrauded this person, but there's a legal loophole that could get this person out of, the law, the common sense thing that they did fraud, the judge more often than not will let the courts exploit the loophole. Why? Because once you exploit the loophole, you all but assure that this party is going to file an appeal, which keeps the case in the courts. That's why in family law, you see almost all the time on written that the laws promote equality amongst parents. But if you look at the statistics, 80% of child custody cases, regardless of how the law is written, the mother ends up with majority custody. And fathers pay in the United States 90% of all child support. Furthermore, in the United States, since I'm going to bring up something about, okay, I am conservative, it's well known, fiscally conservative, socially moderate, not socially hardcore liberal, but I do have some certain beliefs about, social laws that I think uh, the conservative approach doesn't really do well for. There was a time in history when divorce was regulated where it had to be at fault. There had to be a reason for the divorce, a legal reason, and abuse and whatnot, or clearly defined situations. Okay, because was a contract of marriage was a legally binding business document at the end of the day. 1969, California being the cutting edge state that it was on the books, converted at fault divorce to no fault divorce. Anybody could get divorced for any reason. You could break a contract for whatever reason. Call it irreconcilable differences. And every other state in the nation saw that and started to follow suit. Do you know who the governor was during that time? Who basically passed it and let it go through? That was Ronald Reagan, our old pal. Now, I like Reagan. Thought he was good, but he had some blaring blind spots. Reagan's choice to go for no fault divorce, if you know the story between Jane Wyman and whatnot, and what happened there, and how hard it was for him to get divorced in order to marry uh, um, Nancy Davis, who became Nancy Reagan. He was the proponent of the no fault divorce. Effectively, he was the one who opened the gate for the breakdown of the family that we have now, instead of reforming it and trying to strengthen families. So, as much as I like Reagan on one end, Reagan was an abject failure on a couple of other areas. Um, and so, that being said, the no fault divorce gave the government total control of the broken family, which all but assured the floodgates of cases being brought into the court systems were going to be endless. The revenue stream was just going to go nuts, and to this day, it is nuts. So that is why when you see mothers mad about abusers getting control, and then you see fathers mad about losing control, and then they fight each other, mothers and fathers, they don't realize that they're both getting played. Because at the end of the day, the judiciary doesn't care about mothers or fathers. You always hear in a court of law, it says the best interest of the child. Well, statistic after statistic shows that divorce is not in any, except for the rarest occasions, not in the best interest of a child. So you can't argue after a divorce about the best interest of the child if you're not going to protect the best interest of the child before the divorce occurs. It's illogical, it's unethical, it's hypocritical. So what happens is, since the courts do not put anything in place that you have to go through marital counseling or you have to go through these steps before you file a divorce, it shows that they don't care about the family. They don't care about the mothers or the fathers or the children. It's all a facade to keep the ball going. But they want an uneducated public who doesn't know any better and still trusts them and keeps coming back to them to plead their rights. That's why I see all these mothers fighting for rights. That's why I see fathers fighting for rights. Now, why in our society, through judicial discretion, do mothers get more control of the children? Well, go look at the child support, how the child support laws are written. Child support baseline, the biggest weighted percentage of their, when they use what's called the disomaster to the math calculations for child support, The biggest weighted percentage is custodial time. Regardless of how much you make, custodial time is the biggest weighted percentage that goes into the mathematical equation. The idea being is the more custodial time you have, the presumption right there is the big word. The presumption is the more money the other parent can pay you. So the the less custodial time this parent has compared to this one, the higher the probability this parent is going to have to pay the other parent the other money. Now, in a society, who is historically the majority breadwinner? Men. Historically, fair or not, men make more per hour than women. Women predominantly in the historical family have been the stay-at-home moms, the ones with the lesser education, the more the stay-at-home moms, the more nurturing. Okay, so they don't have the ability to make as much in the internet in the workforce. That's changing though because the way our it was the 2009 uh, uh, crash that really changed the dynamic where women were becoming more of the predominant breadwinners and men were staying home more because men inherently were making more money. And if companies wanted to cut their bottom line, what they did is they got rid of all the men. They took the lower paying women, put them into those positions that the men previously held, but at the same lower dollar amount. So they got more bang for their buck. And now men were marginalized out of the workforce, became stay-at-home dads more. That happened more, and it's really changed the dynamic. That's happening more and more in society where women are more of the heads of corporations, more of the major breadwinners, but at that lower level. So women who think they're making advances really not. They're getting played also. It's another scam. And it's all money driven. So, child support issue. That is why lawyers and the government, if you notice how the laws are written, it's always geared towards the non-custodial parent. And most of the child support issues and most of the child support programs inside are geared towards the dad because it's assumed the dad is going to be paying. If we lived in a true equal society, they would remove the gender-based language and say, "Hey, this is for anybody." But it isn't. So inherently, the government sets up a structure to remove fathers from the family, then have them pay for a child they never see. And in doing so, they assure that that child who grows up without the father doesn't have the influence, which fathers are very important. And that child grows up without this, which gives a higher increased uh, percentage or possibility that that child themselves will get divorced or have emotional social problems that will then feed back into the system and you keep the cycle of revenue coming in. Mothers don't understand this. Fathers have known it for a long time, but we felt powerless and the system is self-governing. Case in point, let's say you have a problem with the judge at a local courthouse and the courthouse itself has an umbrella structure with the presiding judge and all the judges that work under, but they're all colleagues. They all previously were lawyers who worked in the area. They all kind of work together outside the courts. They're all judges. They're all buddies. You file a motion against one of the judges for being corrupt, and you file it with the presiding judge. The judge will then look at it, say, "Oh, you know what? We did our research, but we found nothing wrong. Your motion's denied." Okay. It's a case of the foxes guarding the henhouse. They're protecting their own interest. Why? Because it's a system and you're not part of it. George Carlin nailed this many years ago. So you have to understand something. If you're going to go into a court of law for any purpose, it's not to protect your interest. The courts are always structured to protect their own interest, and they'll give you the table scraps of appearance. That is why justice, when people go to courts and say, I want justice, what usually it means is, I want the truth, and I want the truth to prevail. And I want the global truth to prevail, the truth to come out. In courts of law, justice no longer means outcome. It doesn't mean that at all. Justice is tied to process. The whole issue of due process, you cannot be jailed without due process. You cannot be this without due process. It's I forgot what the due process clause, but right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is 14th Amendment, First Amendment. Differences where due process is key. As long as a judge can say due process was adhered to, which means our procedures were adhered to on paper, then due process and justice was served. End of story. Basically, we have retained our authority, but we are absolved of responsibility for the outcome. It's a way of preservation of the self-interests of the state. This is how our courts work. Our courts work on self-preservation of interest of power. This is how our government works. This is how nation government works. This is not talking about any specific party. Republicans, Democrats, that's all a red herring. Neighborhood. No, this is about structure. This is historical structure of governance. So you cannot expect, under any circumstances, for the government legal system to protect the interest of the individual, because it's against the best interest of the government to protect the citizen, because to do so all but assures that the citizen has no reason to return back to them at a later date for further assistance on issues, which cuts the government's own throat from existence and deprives them of a revenue stream. You gotta accept this fact. So I get really tired of when I see moms fighting dads, when I see parties fighting parties. I have a certification in conflict resolution and mediation for the sole purpose of helping people stay outside of the courts. I am an enemy to lawyers because I think lawyers are slime bags for the most part, and I'm not alone in that. And lawyers become politicians. Lawyers become heads of corporations. Lawyers, lawyers are paid to argue. They're not paid to resolve problems. They're paid to create problems because that's what keeps them employed. So we need to wake up to this fact real quick. The government is not your friend. Lawyers aren't your friends. They don't have your best interest in mind. Who has your best interest in mind is your neighbors, the people that the government doesn't want you to be in agreement with. Why do you look at news? News is all about pitting neighbor against paper and neighbor against neighbor. It's all about fighting. And if you look at TikTok, look at all the TikTok videos of this person pranking this person owning this person, Karen's this. It's all about promoting animosity between people and not promoting the good in people. It's promoting the worst in people. That is what TikTok, that is what these Instagram posts are all about. highlighting the worst in humanity and then propagating it. And then governments making money off of it because that's what they can do. And government, you know who government's filled with? People from your neighborhoods, people from your churches. How many lawyers do you know sit in a church on Sunday, then go in and fight in a court case on a Monday? They go sit in church on Monday, praising God with their heart. God is good, blah, 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 blah. They do all that stuff. Then they go into court and then they basically lie or give an argument that they know isn't true, but it's there to present their client's interest. And then they justify it. Hey, I'm doing what I was paid for. And this is, they compartmentalize thinking that somehow that's okay. It's a lot. They come from your families. Then they go into these things. So that basically at the end of the day is why lawyers aren't trusted. This is where we're at in our society. And if you don't wise up, it's not going to change. Now, people say, well, what do we do? What do we do to solve the problem? I'm going to ask a question right back. How do you change the heart of somebody who has no desire to change and profits immensely off of the corrupted, broken state that things are in? Do you think that they want to change? Do you think they want to listen to you? Do you think they care? No, they don't. It's a lost cause. Well, people say, well, that's really bleak. It's bleak if you think that they're the point at which the change can be made. If we know that the courts exist for money and revenue, and revenue is the fuel that keeps them going, how do we starve the fuel source? How do we starve the fuel source? By talking, by doing this right here, by you and I having a conversation, by you and I agreeing to be mature, show wisdom, to make to settle our differences. That is what's going to help our future, not lawyers, not the courts. They don't care because they made their money off you. They don't want you to speak up. They want you to be status quo. That is why a lot of times they put gag orders. That's why they don't want an educated public. Why? Because if you're educated, you'll see the scam that's happening. They don't want people talking. So ask yourself today, how are you going to be a peacemaker? How are you going to help somebody who has a difference? You can't help everybody, and some people are hell-bent for leather, and that's their own cause. But you can make changes where you can, and you can try to do that. That's what my challenge for you today is to go and make a change by being a peacemaker wherever you can. Some people, it's just not in them. It's not part of their personality to be a peacemaker. There's a broken part of their psyche that does not allow them to be equitable. You can't help those people. That's their journey. That's their road. And, God bless them. For the grace of God go they. It's not my life. Anyway, this was just on my important today. This was totally off cuff. I didn't have any notes, but this has been something on my mind. Catch you later and have a good one, guys.